Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Truckers Podcast, FYI. I'm your host, Doug from Ontario, Canada. It is 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the 23rd of April, 2023. Thank you for joining me. Renting and your rights. Well, good morning. I hope your weekend is going really well. Here's something really funny. I think it's funny. You probably think it's funny too. Yesterday, when I did my introduction on my show in the morning, I said it was 2022. 2023 is the year. So you probably, if you downloaded the show and you listened in and thinking, what is Trucker talking about being 2022? So anyways, that happens. It's a live show. Anything can go. Yesterday was just a wet, rainy day, start to the weekend. And today is, well, it's better. Cloudy with sunny breaks. A little bit on the cool side. But get out there, enjoy the day. I'm going to be out there later this afternoon doing my errands and things like that. So, I talked a little bit yesterday too, the rise of rental evictions, landlords admitting to that they're only trying to get you out to increase the rent because they want somebody in there that can pay, $1,600, $2,000 a month. They don't want anybody in there, who's paying $700, $800 a month. So, in my opinion on that still stands is that, they don't care if they uproot you. They don't care if they put you on the street. They don't care where you go. They just want you out to get more money. Well, we have rights as tenants in this country and in this province. The other problem that we're seeing with these rental evictions is that they are not giving the tenant the first right of refusal. They'll evict you, they will do their renovations, they won't give you a timeline when it'll take, and before long, when you think you're going to be going back into your rental unit, somebody else is renting it, which is illegal, by the way. Eviction rules, and this is why we have rules, to protect tenants, and obviously there's rules to protect landlords. And as your tenant rights, so, rules on evictions, your landlord can only evict you in specific situations and must give you written notice using the proper form provided by the Landlord and Tenant Board, which is an independent tribunal with the authority to resolve residential tenancy disputes here in Ontario. And the form must give the reason for eviction. Right? Just because you receive an eviction notice, let's say for rental evictions, for non-payment of rent, for disturbing other tenants, or whatever reasons they're coming up with why they want to evict you. Even if your landlord gives you a written notice, you don't have to move out. And your landlord must first apply for and receive an eviction order from the Landlord's Tenants Board. You have the right to go to a hearing and explain why you should not be evicted. When people think that, okay, they gave me a T14 or whatever the form might be and stuff like that, and you panic and you think, oh, I'm being kicked out. That's not the case. Now, how a landlord can end a tenancy. So, of course, we have tenancy agreements. Every landlord should have one. And you should, you're going to sign, a 1 year's lease. Now, tenancy agreements too, says so, when a landlord rents a unit to someone, they enter into a tenancy agreement. It's a contract in which the tenant agrees to pay rent for the right to live in that rental unit. And a written tenancy agreement is often called a lease. So there's a fixed term tenancy. If a landlord and tenant agree that the tenancy will last for a specific period of time, this is called a fixed term. So maybe you want to rent for 6 months. This is because both the start and the end dates are set out in the tenancy agreement, and most leases are for a fixed term, usually 1 year. And renewing a lease at the end of the fixed term tenancy or lease does not mean that the tenant has to move out or sign a renewal or a new lease in order to stay. So the lease is renewed automatically on a month-to-month basis. If the rent is paid monthly or week-to-week basis, if rent is paid weekly, this means the landlord and tenant do not have to sign a new fixed-term lease. Some may want you to. That's entirely up to you. We have security of the tenancy. Tenancy have the security of the tenancy. This means the tenant can continue to occupy the rental unit until the tenant decides to leave and give the landlord proper notice that they intend to move out. If the landlord gives the tenant notice to end the tenancy and the tenant does not move out, the landlord can apply to the Landlord's Tenants Board for an order of evicting the tenant. And the tenant has the right to go to the hearing and explain why they should not be evicted or asked to move or asked for more time to move out. Seen this before. This happened not too long ago. The landlord cannot lock the tenant out of the rental unit. This actually, I think I was going back a couple of weeks ago, and I believe it happened in Hamilton, Ontario. And thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Doug from Ontario, Canada. So I'm talking about renting and your rights here in Ontario, Canada. Obviously we have the Landlord's Tenants Board. Tenants have rights, of course. Landlords have rights. And talking about, how your tenancy can end and specifically I'm talking about what has been going on lately is reno evictions. So one specifically what happened, and this was not too long ago. So like a landlord, if a landlord wants to evict you, they have to go through the proper proceedings. They have to file with the landlord tenants board. You have to be served notice. And just because you've been served notice that the landlord wants to end the tenancy, you do not have to move out, because you have the right to go to the hearing, and you have the right to be heard, and you have the right to explain why you should not be evicted. You also, when it comes to security of the tenancy, so for an example, landlord cannot lock a tenant out of the rental unit, and this happened not too long ago. I'm thinking it was like 3 weeks ago. I was reading this article, and the landlord asked the tenant, say, like, you have to do some minor repairs. Would you mind going down to the closest coffee shop, have a coffee, and when it's all done, you can come back. So what happened was, so the tenant goes and has a coffee, and only to come back to find out they are locked out of their unit. And this was a reno eviction, but in this case, an illegal one. And what's been happening, and landlords, small landlords, and that they've been admitting that they're using these rental evictions to get people out to charge more rent. They're admitting to this. So with the security of the tenancy, tenants have so this means that a tenant can continue to occupy the rental unit until the tenant decides to leave and gives up the property and the proper notice that they intend to move out. So the landlord and tenant agree to end the tenancy. So you're looking for a new place to live, you bought a house, whatever. So the landlord gives the tenant a notice to end the tenancy for a reason allowed by the act, and the tenant agrees to move out, or the tenant does not agree with the landlord's notice, then the landlord applies to the landlord tenants board, and the landlord tenants board issues an eviction order, which is not necessarily depending on the circumstances, right? If the landlord's going to end the tenancy, they're going to do it for non-payment of rent, rental eviction, a relative that's going to move into the unit. And of course, there's other reasons why they can end a tenancy, is that you maybe are disturbing other residents. You can possibly even be evicted for hoarding if you simply do not clear out the piles of junk that you have in your unit. So there's several reasons, you can be evicted. So when I mentioned this to you, that the landlord, this was recently, locked a tenant out of their unit. So it is illegal for a landlord to change the locks to a rental unit of the building without giving the tenant a key for the new locks. And the only exceptions are that locks are changed because the tenant has been evicted by the sheriff, or the landlord is sure the tenant has abandoned the unit. It is an offense for a landlord to illegally lock a tenant out of their rental unit or the building. If a landlord is convicted of this provincial court under the Provincial Offences Act, they could face a $50,000 fine. Seems to me, in that one instance, what took place, seems to me that this landlord is willing to be fined up to $50,000. Now, if a tenant is illegally locked out of the unit, and if the unit is still vacant, the tenant can apply to the landlord's tenants board for an order that requires the landlord to let the tenant back into that unit. And it's a due process. And right now, the backlog for hearings at the landlord tenants board is a long wait. And this one particular landlord decided to go to great lengths because it's taken so long to go for a hearing that they would just change the locks, kick you out, your belongings are still in there, which is illegal. And it's, it's kind of surprising to me that landlords are admitting that they are using rental evictions to get you out in order to charge more rent. Now, I talked a little bit about that yesterday too, because, by going at any means of getting you out and using that, rental eviction as an excuse, don't care where you go. They don't care if you end up on the street. They don't care if you are on a disability. They don't care if you're a low earner. It's ridiculous, really. Showing no empathy to achieve only one thing. I look at that as being a narcissist. You will step on anyone in order to achieve a goal. And what happens to those individuals? You have no empathy if they end up on the street, because normally low earners, people on a disability, or people who are on a low pension, are not going to be able to afford market rent. And rents vary, from city to city. Toronto was, for an example, Toronto being one of the most expensive places to live. An average one-bedroom apartment in Toronto is a little over $2,000 a month. An average one-bedroom apartment here in the city of London is about $1,600 a month. On an average rent in Vancouver, that'll range between $1,800 to $2,000 a month. So we have people who are living in their apartments or their townhouse or like that, and they've been living there for years, and they've been paying roughly an average of $750 to $800 a month. They lived there for 12, 14, 15 years. And like I say, landlords are now using that rental eviction as an excuse to get you out so they can charge market rent. Now, what happens when it comes to for an eviction? So right now, let's go here. Um, so under the law, the maximum fine for an offense under the Residential Tenancy Act is $50,000, up to $50,000 for an individual. What they want to do now is increase that up to $100,000 for an individual. And for corporations right now, it's up to $250,000 for a corporation. They want to raise that to $500,000. So when it comes to eviction for personal use, so they want to move back in, or they want to have a relative move back in, or a relative move in, they have to give you the equivalent of 1 month's rent or offer you another unit if they want to use the unit themselves, they want to use the unit for their family, are selling the property and the purchaser will be using the unit themselves. Now, what I've heard before is that, when it comes to wanting to have family member, okay, so with the inflation, with the cost of rents going up, you think about this for 1 second. For an example, you're paying $800 a month. Market rent, you say, you're paying $800 a month. You lived in your unit for 10 to 12 years. Market rent is, $1,600, $1,700 a month on average, right? Landlord comes to you, wants to end the tenancy, wants a family member to move in. You honestly believe that he's going to charge a family member $1,700 a month to move in? Trying to help a family member because maybe because they're paying high rent somewhere else, and they say, hey, look, you got a place, let me move in. You honestly believe that they're going to charge that? I really don't think so. So they're going to use this of telling you they're going to have a family member move in, that you must vacate whatever. Here's a month's rent, or I do have another unit for you, or whatever the case may be. Usually they don't have another unit for you, and you are out. So you have rights. And if you can prove that it was not a family member that moved in there, and after 1 year goes by, and you can prove that a family member is not living there, and somebody else moved in there and they raised that rent by another $800 a month because they wanted more rent, they want to increase the rent. If you can prove that it's not a family member, the landlord would have to pay you the equivalent of how much they raised that rent. So if it went up $800, they'll have to pay you $800 for a full year. So every month, so 12 months times $800. If you can prove that it's not a family member that moved into that unit, he just evicted you because he wants more money for rent. Rental evictions are on a rise. And that's to get people out. Like I said, people who are only, they've lived there, I don't care. 12 years, 15 years, you're only paying $750 to $800 a month. They want market rent. They're using this to get you out. So when it comes to rental evictions, to renovate, repair, or demolish, right? So they must give you the right of first refusal to move back into the unit following the renovations. You must notify your landlord in writing before you leave that you want them to offer you the unit when that is complete. Completed the renovations. Under the new rules, if your landlord fails to provide you a right of first refusal, you will have 2 years rather than one to file a claim with the Landlord's Tenants Board for compensation. So bad faith evictions? Well, bad faith is that, would be saying, oh, my mother-in-law's moving in there, my son's moving in there, and it's not. Telling you, yeah, we're going to give the unit back to you when it's renovated, and they don't. Landlords, they must act in good faith when evicting a tenant for reasons that are not the tenant's fault. So that means that the landlord must have honest intentions to use the rental unit for the purpose stated on the eviction notice. Renovations, family member moving in, demolition. The landlords will also be required to disclose their past use of a no-fault eviction when applying for a no-fault eviction, and this will give the Landlord's Tenants Board more information to consider when determining whether the application was made in good faith. And an eviction order, if one should be issued. And just because you get a notice to vacate, you do not have to move out. It's a due process, and you have the right to challenge that eviction. Now, when it comes to, over the course of the pandemic and, the onset of the pandemic, um, so the non-essential worker sector, have to close their mom and pop shops, and, the big box stores can stay open and they can sell whatever they want, whatever the case may be. People, are waiting, for employment insurance. Generally, people who are earning just over minimum wage. Minimum wage here in Ontario is $16.55 an hour. So maybe you're earning $17.50 or $17 an hour, whatever the case may be. You're basically living paycheck to paycheck. So if something were to happen, chances are you're going to fall behind on your rent because you're waiting for employment insurance. You get behind on your rent. People, so the government said, okay, we're going to put a rent freeze. If you can pay your rent, pay your rent. We encourage you to pay your rent. If this is going to be an issue for you, contact your landlord, sort of make out an arrangement of some sort, right? So when people fall behind on the rent, so the rent repayment agreements that Protecting Tenants and the Strengthening Community and Housing Act encourages landlords to try to negotiate a repayment agreement with a tenant before seeking eviction if rent has not been paid during COVID-19, like I was talking about. So when a landlord applies for an eviction order for rent arrears, the landlord and tenant board must now consider whether the landlord tried to work with the tenant to catch up on the rent before seeking an eviction. This is to encourage repayment agreements so evictions can be avoided. Right? So he's going to apply because you haven't been paying, and he's going to be asked if you try to work out some arrangements, stuff like that, and he's going to say, nope, they didn't pay the rent, I want them out. You should be paying something. If you could afford to pay, half every month, but you have to remember that you still have to be able to get caught back up on the arrears. So when your employment insurance would come in, or the fund that the federal government put out, the CERB payments of $2,000 a month for people who are affected by COVID-19, for people who work in the food industry and non-essential services, all those people who were out of work, and the government was paying you $2,000 a month. So you had to wait for that money to come in and be able to get caught back up on your rent. But you have to, and if you do come in an agreement and the landlord agrees with whatever agreement you come up with, if you then not follow through on that agreement, you're going to find yourself in a predicament that you more likely will be evicted. So it's important too, if you both can come up with some sort of repayment agreement and you both stick to it, then there's no need for the landlord to evict you. So then we have the formal repayment agreements, which, they encourage the landlords and tenants to work together to establish the fair arrangements, like I was talking about, for repayment of rent. Right? Just because you turned around and say, hey, look, I can only give you $400 this month, you still owe $400. So now, if the landlord applies to the Landlord's Tenants Board for an eviction based on non-payment of rent, the landlord and tenant may settle upon the eviction application by reaching a formal repayment agreement that is approved by the Landlord's Tenants Board. So we know the circumstances can change, and they did change, and a tenant might suddenly be unable to meet the terms of the board-approved repayment plan. So if the landlord gets an eviction order, tenants can still ask the Landlord's Tenants Board for a hearing to consider their circumstance before an eviction order is enforced. Right? So if you're suddenly unable to meet those terms, right, because you're going to go back and say, okay, look, I'm going to continue. Because you have to see, the thing is that to get caught up on the arrears, you still have to pay your full month's rent plus whatever you owe. So you have to be able to get caught up in the shortest period of time as possible to bring things back up to where they should be. If you can't meet that, you break that deal. Is the landlord going to be willing to renegotiate? I mean, if that happens, it's just saying that you can't meet that agreement. Even though you made the agreement to keep a roof over your head, and you fail to do so, you you can apply to be, to rediscuss it at the landlord's tenants board, but it doesn't mean, you know, you're going to win that case. Landlords are going to be patient for so long in those circumstances. Repayment agreements, whether formal or informal, do not allow landlords to evict a tenant without an order from the landlord's tenants board. So if you fail to meet that agreement, the landlord can't go and, they see you go somewhere, go and change the locks and you're out. They can't do that, right? So you still have to, continue to be able to request a hearing at the landlord's tenants board and consider the circumstances of each case to determine whether or not an eviction order should be issued. Landlords cannot impose repayment agreements on tenants, and tenants cannot be evicted for refusing a rent payment plan. It's an offense under the Residential Tenancy Act for a landlord to harass or threaten a tenant to get them to move out. Now, you also have the right to mediation. Now, you don't have to just be up in front of the adjudicator. You can have a mediator between you and the landlord to hash out an arrangement. It's a faster process, and it's easier. So the mediation can be used to help resolve disputes faster and easier. It is less formal and intimidating than the traditional hearing process, because in the traditional hearing process, you are in a setting like a courtroom. You have the adjudicator sits up on the bench. You have 50 other tenants sitting waiting to have their cases heard, so they are going to hear all your laundry. All your laundry. So in mediation, if the landlord agrees to mediation, you can go into another room, just you, the landlord, and the mediator, to hash out an arrangement and an agreement. So it is less informal and it is less intimidating. And it is intended to help start a conversation between the tenants and the landlords under the guidance of the neutral mediator who knows the rights and responsibilities under the Residential Tenancy Act. The important thing here is don't ignore your circumstances. In general, landlords don't want to evict, they just want to get paid. When it comes to non-payment of rent, having some difficulties. And just because you receive an N14 form, notice of eviction, doesn't mean you have to move out. You have the right to go through the due process. And like I said, when it comes to these rental evictions, landlords openly admitting that they are doing these rental evictions just to get the low-paying renters out of there and get market rent. We're trying to put a stop to that. That if the renovation is going to be carried out, you have the first right of refusal and move back into that unit. They're trying to change the legislation that so after the renovations, you move back into that unit at the rent that you were paying. So if you're paying $800 a month, it's $800 a month. We have a housing crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. We have a homeless crisis going on here in Canada. Where are people going to go when you are facing that rental eviction? And you know fair well that the landlord's not going to give you back that unit at the rent that you're paying. It's not going to give you that unit, period. It's going to give it to somebody who's going to pay, $1,600, $1,800, depending on how much you're going to raise that rent for someone to move back in. See here, on an annually rent increase, landlords can only increase your rent annually by 2.5%. You continue to live there. You don't have to sign a lease at the end of your term, but the rent can go up to 2.5%. So, let's say, maybe it's a $20 increase or maybe a $25 increase annually, let's say, just for an example. So who is... Oh, the other thing here too, the landlord has to have easy to understand leases. And the standard lease has changed and an updated version is now available. So it has to be, easy for you to understand. And if you don't, have somebody with you that can understand what you're signing. And it is a written to understand language and includes information such as the rent amount and when it is due. What is included in the rent, for example, air conditioning or parking, which is another problem that's been coming up too when it comes to air conditioning in apartment buildings that don't have air conditioning or, controlled central air or whatever case like that, in the older buildings where people have window air conditioners. Now they want to charge them, a monthly fee for the summer months in order to have a window air conditioner, which is ridiculous. So for parking, generally you get one free parking space, or they have visitors parkings in high-rise parking lots anyways, doesn't matter. No smoking. There's a lot of buildings now that, no smoking policies. It also has a section on renter and landlord rights and responsibilities and explains what can and cannot be included in a lease. For an example, who is responsible for maintenance and repairs, when your landlord can enter your unit, that landlords can't ban guests or pets. There was, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, there was an apartment complex where they wanted to charge visitors parking. So much per half hour. That didn't go over so well. So that didn't take place. So, just so those basic things that you do understand, right? Because um, even now, when it comes to the older buildings that don't have um, self-controlled AC or whatever throughout the summer months, because you know how hot it can get. Charging somebody extra because you're not providing it in the first place on top of their rent. Now that might be an extra 100, 150. They may come along and say, "Oh, we want $200 for you to put an air conditioning in, an air conditioner in, a window air conditioner." That might be for the entire summer. But still, a lot of people, low earners and stuff like that, don't have an extra $200 a month. And who's responsible for maintenance and repairs? Well, the landlord is. When your landlord can enter your unit, well, they generally have to give you anywhere from 24 hours to 36-hour notice. They just can't happen by and knocking the door saying, "I want to enter your unit" without notice. They can't do that. They have to give you a written notice of when they are coming in to do an inspection. Who is protected by the rental units? Well, applies to most private residential units, including those in single and semi-detached homes, apartments, condominiums, and secondary units, for example, basement units. And these types of rentals aren't included, such as university and college residents and commercial properties. So like I said, so when it came to the rent increase limits, so for the guideline for 2023 is 2.5% for most tenants. Your rent cannot go up more than the rent increase guideline for every year. So it cannot go more than 2.5%. The landlord, if they want to go higher than that 2.5%, they have to apply to the landlord's tenants board. And they have to present a good reason why, they need to raise it 3%, 5%, 6%, whatever the case may be. It doesn't always necessarily mean the landlord is going to get that increase above the 2.5%. So it is really important to, understand the lease that you're going into, what your rights are when it comes to the Tenancy Act. Because today, you can go online and find out all types of information, find out all kinds of help. If you find yourself in a situation where the landlord wants to evict you for whatever reason, you have rights as a tenant, and you have rights to be heard. So don't panic if you received an eviction notice, because you do not have to move out, because it'll say must move out of this unit by such and such a date. You might not get a hearing for 3 months. You might not get a hearing for 6 months. You may not get a hearing for a year. But don't ignore it. Get in contact with the landlord and tenants board, and they will help you through the process. They will tell you what you need to do. And for however long it takes, You have the right to stay in that unit until your case is heard, until there is a decision made. Rental evictions are no exception. They have to go through the due process. Now, are these landlords now, if this passes legislation, are landlords now, would they be willing to, be subject to a fine up to $100,000, doubled from the 50,000? And our corporations, are they willing to turn around and then willing to pay up to a $500,000 fine, up from $250,000, if they do not offer you that unit back after renovations at the rent you were paying? Not double the rent. We're trying to keep people housed. Certain landlords out there are trying to put you on the street for their monetary gain. And like I said, they don't care where you end up because they want low renters out of their units, and they want market rent. We already have shelters that are full. Shelters are so full, we have tent encampments. People couch surfing. People living in their cars. Those are, the hidden homeless. But to put somebody out on the street for your monetary gain, is ridiculous. And I say shame on those landlords that are doing that. Because they always have tricks up their sleeves. And like I said earlier, even, on a bad faith eviction, saying, oh, I have a family member that wants to move into the unit. And that's not the case. And you move out and they rent it to someone other than family in order to get that double the rent. They may think, and like I said earlier, this happened, and some landlords may think that, okay, we have some minor repairs to do. Why don't you go have a coffee? When we're done, we'll call you. And you come back. And in this case, that wasn't the case. Individuals went and had their coffee. Landlords changed the locks, which is also illegal. So now you're standing out in the street, just the clothes on your back. Your apartment has all your furnishings and clothes in there, and the landlord changed the lock. That actually happened. I can't make that up. That was like 3 weeks ago. Happened in Hamilton, Ontario. Just ridiculous. There's due process, and the landlords there's no, they don't have any, they have to go through the due process just like you do. They have to go through that proper channel. They have to apply to the Landlords Tenants Board. And they have to have reasonable cause to evict you. And generally, the causes are because of non payment of rent, and that you're unable to fulfill your obligations on any agreement that you agreed to during the due process and the hearing of how to get caught back up on the arrears and stuff like that, and you can't meet that criteria, landlord can go through with an eviction. So it's important that you understand your rights as a tenant. We're working on things here in Canada. We're working on affordable housing. We have projects going on right now of buildings going up for affordable housing, but that takes time. They don't go up overnight. We're working on keeping people housed, and this is one of the changes that they're looking for. We're looking to do when it comes to rental evictions. That you, as a tenant, move back into that unit at the rent that you're paying. And if that doesn't happen, then whether it's the private or the corporation landlords, they are subject to double that fine. And if they have several units and if they have several units that they're renting out and they have a record of have bad faith evictions, well, that $50,000 fine doubles to $100,000. They just may get $100,000 fine because it's up to $100,000. People already can't afford to buy a house. Average cost for a house in the city of London, where I reside, is $650,000. The average wage in order to afford a $650,000 home is your income would have to be at least $140,000 a year. The city of Toronto, on the other hand, the average cost of a home is $850,000. Generally, houses are going for over $1 million. Your annual income, is going to be $240,000, $250,000 a year. Vancouver is no exception when it comes to of houses, and they're probably on the same line as what Toronto is. There maybe their average cost of a house is about $900,000, and in Vancouver you're going to have to be making close to $300,000 or more. And who and where makes that kind of money? Your average worker, average income, say middle income, is maybe $60,000 and up. 60 to 100,000. Do we even, like, we still have so we have the upper class, the middle class, lower class, and the poor. So people are not moving. It's even hard to find a rental place because people can't afford to buy. Then if you do find a rental place, they're not offering incentives. Because a lot of units used to sit empty because people were able to afford to buy a house. In order to fill that occupancy, their incentive would be, um, you just pay last month's rent and you move in. Now that's not happening. Now you have to pay first and last because there's no incentives. And if the place is $1,600, you have to come up with $3,200 first and last, plus your moving expenses. So we are, we are in a crisis when it comes to housing. With affordability, the cost of living. You see it. You see when you go to the grocery store. You see it on your hydro bills. You see it at the gas pumps. It's not just Canada that's facing these issues. United States, across Europe, with high inflation. The Bank of Canada, the inflation rate went to 4.5%, and the Bank of Canada has now, has froze it there, and is going to keep it there for a little while, and then hopefully lower it. Yeah, it does. It does include with what's going on, with inflation and stuff like that. And you're right. It is that includes all over the world. You know, um, with all the with all the stocks and everything, and all the commodities that we buy. So wages going up. Right now we have a strike going on in the public worker sector. So government employees, they're on strike, and they want a 13.5% wage increase over 3 years. The strike just took place. It's only been going on for a week. And the government and the public sector workers are already at each other's throat. They earn between $40,000 to $60,000 a year. Public sector workers. There's a lot of people who are not in unions who earn $40,000 to $60,000 a year, and they're not going to get shit. They're not going to get a raise. Your employer's not going to give you a raise. I mean, if you went to your employer and said, "Hey, the cost of living is way up, and can I get a 13.5% raise over 3 years?" What do you think that answer is going to be? Probably a big fat no. And just because, when it comes to collective bargaining and stuff like that, that unions always go high. And somewhere in between, they come down. We had a teacher strike at the beginning of the school year. And the same thing happened, right? They went high on wage. And at the end of the day, they settled for less. Same thing is going to happen here. The other thing is that they want to keep in um, people working from home in the public sector, work in the federal public sector. People who are working from home, not going to the office, they're required to go to the office a couple of days a week right now. You know, so they want to work from home, and we have something like 155,000 public sector workers in Canada. 155, yeah, about 155,000. So you think about that 13.5% increase over 3 years for 155,000 people. That's a lot of taxpayers' money. The teachers union wanted the same thing for um, the teachers, um, helpers in the classroom. It includes custodians and librarians and stuff like that. They wanted a huge increase in wage and stuff like that, and they, settled for a couple percentage less. But that's, it's a due process, and being that this is just, this is only the first week of this strike, of the federal workers. We have to let due process happen, right? But at some point in time, the union and the government has to come to an agreement, or they can have legislation and order them back to work. The general public, like you and me, are only going to put up with it for so long because our services are being interrupted. And as citizens and taxpayers, we're going to allow that to happen for so long. And if we see on the other hand that negotiations are not being done in good faith by the union, we're going to get really upset with you, and vice versa. So I'd say to my fellow Canadians right now, okay, this is just the first week. Let the due process take course. Let the collective bargaining happen. And we'll just go from there. Because I'll say to any union, when it comes to the public sectors, such as teachers and federal workers and provincial workers, whatever the case may be, we're watching, we're listening. It's the taxpayers that pay you. We have other issues to deal with in this country. Everybody is in a situation of some form or another dealing with your everyday expenses in order to survive. If you think that you deserve a 13.5% wage increase, put your money where your mouth is. Not everybody's in a union. And those who are not in a union, they still potentially, are making between $40,000 to $50,000 a year. but you want to stay home and work from home in your pajamas and get a 13.5 wage increase. You worked in the office pre-pandemic, so what changed? Didn't have to get a shirt and tie on. Still have to have your meetings, so you can sit in your office chair close to your desk with a shirt on and be buck naked underneath. Didn't have to get fully dressed. No one's going to see anything else, anyways. They're going to just see you from the chin up on your social media meetings. You're going to take your break and you're going to drive to the closest Tim Hortons to get your coffee. So why can't you drive to the office? The government is a large employer, huge employer. If your employer is ordering you back to work, you're an office worker. Okay, you have to come back to work. You have to come back to the office. Well, then you have to come back to the office. We need you to perform other duties. You need to come back to the office. And it's going to take the office to do it. People became so complacent, being working from home because of the pandemic. Now when they have to go be called back to the office, they cry foul. But I want more money, but I'm not coming back to the office. Your job, your part of your criteria of the job that when you were hired, it was an office job. It wasn't a home-based job. I didn't hire you. I don't pay you to sit at home. I don't know what you're doing at home. I know what you're doing in the office. If you want 13.5% wage increase, then you can get your ass back into the office. The more likely not going to get that high increase. I would probably think it would probably come in terms of maybe around 11%. Because like I said, unions always go high on wage. They always go high on their demands, always. You start high and you work down. So I have to see what happens with that. But anyways, like I said, we're talking about, renting and rates. So, whether you live in Canada, whether you live in the United States, whether you live in Europe, whatever like that, you have tenancy rights in a free democracy, free society democracy. You have tenancy rights. So know your rights. In your area, know your rights as a tenant. So until we meet again, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you coming out on the show, joining me here on the Truckers Podcast. FYI, I try to give you the most informative information and up-to-date information that may or may not help you. I hope it does help you. And thanks for listening. And of course, this is Sunday. Better weather out there today than what Saturday was. There's nothing but rain all day. Sun and cloud today, a little bit more on the mild side, which is nice. So go out there, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And my next show, well, that's usually on the weekends. You know, I don't want to say I'm going to have a show Monday evening, and then it doesn't happen and stuff like that, because I work, I work Monday to Friday, but I work long hours. And I generally start around 6:30 in the morning, and my day ends at 6:30 at night. And then I got a 40-minute commute home. It's hard to do a show, when fatigue starts to set in. And, you start losing your concentration because you're tired, stuff like that. I don't want to do a show that way. So generally on the weekends, right? Sometimes, depending on my day, the way I feel, periodically I would come out during the week and do a show. And that I have to play by ear. Right? But generally Saturday, Sunday mornings, I do an episode. So if you are a follower, I know that when I post a show, that you get a notification. Oh, Truckers post a show. Oh, when? Okay. Hopefully I can join them. Perfect. So right now I'm going to tell you next Saturday morning, nope, I can't. It's a good thing I caught myself, because next Saturday morning we have a driver's meeting. My name is Doug. That is who I am. So I'm going to have to figure something out, because next Saturday morning we have a driver's company meeting from 8 a.m. until 11 a.m. So I'm going to have to figure something out for that show. And what probably was going to happen is going to end up being a Saturday evening show. And I would say, between 9 and 10 p.m. Next Saturday, but it will be a Sunday morning show. So I'm kind of glad I caught myself, because, I could, because I'm going to have next Saturday morning show now. No, I have a driver's meeting that I have to go to. Mandatory. Paid. I appreciate that, Big Lord, that you'll catch up in my next show, and everybody else that comes on the show. My listeners and that one thing that I and I say, and I really really mean this, that I do appreciate you coming on and listening to the Truckers Podcast. FYI, because without you, there's no podcast. You, the listeners, make that podcast. Can't do it without you. So I appreciate that. And I know that you listen to other podcasts. You have other favorite podcasts and stuff like that, and that's great. So do I. So until then, I'm going to have to say, for now, next Saturday evening, but hopefully I can fit an episode in one of these weekday evenings coming up. But like I say, when I posted it, if you are following with me, if you click follow, then you should get a notification that I have posted an episode. So, once again, thank you for joining me. Take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Canada, take care, be safe.